The institution of marriage is under great attack. The number of Americans that are getting married is at a 40-year low in our country. The reason, because so many people are living together instead of choosing to get married as God said. Now, what really bothers me is the world has corrupted our view of marriage as Christians and in the church. Think about this. In 1870, there was one divorce for every 34 marriages. In 1900, there was one divorce for every 12 marriages. 1940, there was one divorce for every 5 marriages. 1950, there was one divorce for every 3 marriages. Today, here in this decade, the estimate says there is one divorce for every 1.8 marriage. And the reason, the world has corrupted our view of marriage. Now, here's what really bothers me. The church has been silent. The church really, as far as instructing young people, instructing parents, how they're to instruct their children, how to find a mate, and how to build and have a marriage, the church has been silent. If you were to study the average home teaches their children how to drive and spends more time teaching their children how to drive than they do teaching their children how to find a wife. Now, I'm all for driving, but it would be better for our children not to know how to drive and have a good marriage than for them to be expert drivers and to fail at marriage. So as we come to Ruth chapter 3, we see Ruth is a foreign girl. Her husband has died. She's returned to Bethlehem with her mother-in-law, and she's excluded by the law of God from entering into the family of God. Yet Ruth has this incredible desire. She wants to belong to God's family. She told Naomi in Ruth chapter 1, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whether thou goest, I will go. Whether thou lodgest, I will lodge. Your people, they'll be my people. And your God, He'll be my God." She wants to be a part of God's family. But listen, for Ruth to be a part of God's family, she had to find someone that would love her. Wait a minute. There was a man named Boaz, and he loved her. But for Ruth to become a part of God's family, Ruth had to find someone that would show her grace. Wait a minute. Ruth chapter 2 tells us that Boaz showed Ruth grace. Third requirement, if Ruth would wanted to be a part of the family of God, she had to have someone that would redeem her. The question we come to in Ruth chapter 3, is Boaz willing to redeem Ruth? This morning, we read and we discover in this story how Ruth found a mate. I want you to see 5 principles for finding a mate. The sermon is entitled, Marriage Matters. Marriage Matters. Now listen, this sermon is for parents. This sermon is for grandparents. This sermon is for all of the young people that are here. It is crucial that you choose God's best in finding a mate. Parents, you cannot be AWOL in this decision. You must prepare from the time your child is 3 years old for the mate that he's going to marry when he's 18, 19, 20, 22, 30, whatever. It's your responsibility. Grandparent, you're not supposed to, "Oh, well, I'm done with all of that stuff." No, you're to be involved in your grandchild's life. You're to reinforce what the parents are teaching. You have to be involved in this. 5 principles for finding a mate from Ruth chapter 3. Principle number 1. Have the parents' involvement and blessing. Have the parents' involvement and blessing. Notice verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, "My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? So Naomi decided that she wanted to find Ruth a mate. Now, in those days, the man did not propose to the woman as he does in our day. Their parents did the proposing. So this parent would get with this parent and they would choose for their children to be married. Well, Naomi, as the parent of Ruth, took it upon herself to find Ruth a husband. Naomi, no doubt, had seen the connection that Boaz had with Ruth. From the first time Boaz saw Ruth, he was interested. From the first conversation that Ruth came back and told Naomi about Boaz, it was obvious her heart was stirred for Boaz. This relationship was successful because Ruth had Naomi's involvement and had her blessing. The young person, don't get into a serious relationship without having your parents' involvement and without having their blessing upon that relationship. Parents, grandparents, you need to instruct your children from early days the type of person that they need to choose. I personally don't think it's the parents' responsibility to pick the child's mate, but the parents need to be involved. Every child should go to their parents and say, Mom, Dad, the most important decision I'll ever make in my life is my marriage partner. Please help me. Do you see anything in this person that may cause me problems down the road? Principle number 1, have your parents' involvement and blessing. Principle number 2, get to know the person. Get to know the person. Look at verse 2. And now is not Boaz of our kindred? That word kindred means acquaintance. It's the only time this word is used in the Old Testament. Boaz was a man that both Naomi and Ruth knew very well. Those who are looking for a mate should choose one they're acquainted with. Someone that they know, someone that they've seen their character, someone that they've seen their work ethic, someone that they've seen their personality, someone that they've seen, well, this person is just stable. They're not moody up and down. You don't want any surprises after you're married. That's why you need to take time and get to know the person. Just be friends with the person. Boaz was acquainted with Ruth. They were just friends for a long time. Naomi knew Boaz because she had seen him over the years. Ruth knew Boaz because she had worked several months harvesting grain in his field. They took time getting acquainted. And every young person should do that. Parents, you should help your young people do that. This idea of going 0 to 90 miles an hour in a week's time is foolish. They should take time and get to know each other. Great illustration of this is Jacob and Rachel. Went down, love at first sight, if there ever was love at first sight. But he waited 7 years to marry her. You don't need to wait, and it's probably not best to wait 7 years to marry your mate. But it is good to take time. It is good to get well acquainted with that future mate so that you know them. Parents, you begin teaching your children the importance of patience and waiting when they're 3, when they're 4, when they're 5, when they're 8, when they're 12. The reason so many parents have heartache when their kids are 18, 19, and 20 is because they haven't done the training back when they're 8, 9, and 10. The second principle, get to know the person. The third principle, get to know the person's friends. Look on in verse 2. And now is not Boaz of our kindred, with whose maidens thou wast? See, Ruth had worked right beside Boaz's maidens in the fields for probably 3 months. She had learned a lot about Boaz from those to whom Boaz associated. If those to whom Boaz associated were just scoundrels, it's a poor reflection on Boaz. Well, Ruth heard how they talked about Boaz. She knew what kind of character Boaz had by listening to his friends talk about him. And the same is true today. You can tell a lot about a person by looking at their friends. If someone associates with losers, there's a tendency that they're going to be a loser. My dad used to tell us, you run with dogs, you're going to get fleas, so don't run with dogs. And the same is true in life. Check out that person, know that person, but know his friends. Great example of this in the Bible is Amnon. Amnon was pulled down spiritually and did great wickedness because he had a friend named Jonadab that discouraged him spiritually. When you're looking for a mate, you need to make sure you got parental involvement and blessing. You need to get to know the person. You need to get to know the person's friends. Chapter 2, verse 4. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said unto the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered him, the Lord bless thee. See, these people that associated with Boaz, they were great people, and they were encouraging him spiritually because Boaz was a spiritual man and encouraged those around him spiritually. You can tell a lot about the person by their friends. Parents, keep a watch over your children's friends. If your children are homeschooled, if they're in Christian school, if they're in public school, you need to watch out for their friends. My kids come home regularly and we just talk. And I ask every one of them, who are you hanging out with at school? Who are you sitting with at lunch? And I ask my kids, are they good for you spiritually or do they tend to get you into trouble? Principle number 4, get to know the person at the right time. Get to know the person at the right time. Look on in verse 2. And now is not Boaz of our kindred, with whose maidens thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight in the threshing floor. You see, the timing was right for Ruth to show her interest in Boaz. This time was a joyous celebration over harvest. Boaz would be in a great mood. Having harvested all of the crops, the stress would be relieved. It was a good time. Now that he had all of those responsibilities completed, he could fulfill the levirate marriage requirements. The timing was a great time for them to develop a relationship. Now here's the principle. We need to wait till the right time to find a mate. Parents, pardon me, but when your child is 13, 14, 15, 16, they're not ready to get married. So why are you allowing them to get into a serious relationship? You are setting your child up for failure. You are setting your child up to be defrauded and to defraud others by letting them get in serious relationships when they're not emotionally ready, they're not financially ready, they're not physically ready. Now think about Ruth for a second. She was emotionally ready. She had already done her grieving over her husband, and she was past that. She was emotionally ready. She was stable. She was settled into the country. She was ready physically. The timing was right for this relationship. Same is true in our day. We need to wait till the right time to get to know the person. 5th principle. We need to get prepared ourselves for our future mate. And this is where I want to spend the remaining part of our time. Naomi prepared Ruth to find a mate, the same way every parent has a responsibility to prepare their child for finding a mate. Naomi gave Ruth 8 preparations that she needed to do in her life to get her ready for Boaz. Every young person needs to follow these 8 preparations. Every parent needs to make a commitment. I'm going to begin right now, if my child is 3, if my child is 10, if my child is 16, to begin preparing my child for their future mate. 8 preparations. The first one, look at verse 3. Wash thyself therefore and anoint thee. Naomi tells Ruth to bathe. She said, you're going to go find a mate. You need to take a bath. You need to put on perfume. The anointing here involves perfume or deodorant. If Ruth is going to express her desire to be a wife to Boaz, listen, she needs to smell clean and feminine. She's talking about physical hygiene. But understand, there's another principle here talking about spiritual. And parents, we have that responsibility to teach our children to prepare themselves to be spiritually clean, to be spiritually chaste when they walk down that marriage aisle. You have that responsibility, and so many times we're shirking it. So many times we say, well, that is the church's responsibility. That is the school's responsibility. Dad, it is your responsibility, and you must not shirk your responsibility. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 17. Wherefore come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord. Touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. Parents, you are to set up boundaries. Explain it to your child. Say, you know what? We have some restrictions in this household, and the reason we do, there's going to be a time you're going to walk through that door and you're going to come down that aisle, and we want you to be holy. Second, preparation. There was a need for clothing. Look on in verse 3. Wash thyself therefore and anoint thee, and put thy raiment upon thee. These were her best clothes. She didn't wear her old work clothes out to find a mate. She didn't wear her old widow clothes out to find a mate. She put on her best clothes. She was going out on a mission. Her mission was not to work. Her mission was to wed. Now listen, a shabby dressed girl will only get the interest of a shabby guy. And so many times, parents, we have failed. So many times, it bothers me in this generation. We dress horribly. It's just like it's cool to be sloppy. It's cool to be a slouch. It's cool just to look like you just woke up in the morning and just took out your wrinkled clothes and put them on. And that's wrong. Parents, you need to teach your children how to dress. And while we're on the subject, when a person takes time to dress up, they're showing that they are valuable and they appreciate the other person and the other person is valuable. We should be modest in our dress. We should be above reproach in our dress. Ruth dressed up to show her appreciation for Boaz. She wanted to look good for Boaz. You know, when we come to church, it's important that we dress up to go see God. Now, yes, I know God looks on their heart. But when I come to church, if I'm dressed sloppy, if I'm dressed like, oh, I'm just going out there to work in the ditches, what am I saying about God? I'm saying, God, I don't value your presence too much. The reason I believe we should dress up when we go to church, it's because I have a high view of God. And He's worthy of my best. I'm not going to go to church the way I go to work. I'm going to clean myself up and show Him, you are high and holy in my life, and I'm here just to do my best for you. There was a need for clothing. Thirdly, there was a need for compatibility. Look on in verse 3. Wash thyself therefore and anoint thee, put raiment upon thee, and get thee down to the floor. The floor is the threshing floor where the winnowing of barley was done. Down shows that geographically the threshing floor was in the valley below Bethlehem. You see, Bethlehem sat upon a ridge, kind of upon a high hill, and all of the surrounding farmland was in the valleys below. So Ruth would leave Bethlehem, leave Naomi's house, and go down to the valley to where Boaz was. Here's the point. If you want to find a good mate, you have to put yourself in a good environment to find that mate. You don't find good mates out in the world. You find good mates at church. You find good mates at prayer meetings. You find good mates at Bible studies. If you want to find a good mate, you need to go where the good mates are. Choose the right environment. There was a need for compatibility. Fourth, preparation. Parents, you have to teach your kids that. You have to teach your kids that from the time they're 3, from the time they're 4, from the time they're 9, they're 10. Young people, make the decision now. You're going to look and find a mate in a good environment like a Christian college. Number 4, there was a need for conduct. Now look at verse 3 again. Wash thyself therefore, anoint thee, put thy raiment upon thee, get thee down to the floor. Notice this. But make not thyself known unto the man until he shall have done eating and drinking. Now there were a number of people that would have been there, mostly Boaz's workers, all those that had winnowed the grain and had been involved in the process. After the winnowing was complete, they would have this great feast to celebrate. Well, Ruth was there. Naomi instructs Ruth, you go in there and you mingle. You go in there and you associate with all those ladies that you would work with. But don't approach Boaz during this time. Don't interfere with his activities. She was to wait till all of the activities were over. Then she was to go and approach Boaz. Here's the point. Ruth was to exercise good manners. Ruth, this party was not about her. She was to be polite. She was not to be obtrusive. She was to wait her turn. She was not to be loud. She was not to be obnoxious. She was not to be pushy. She was not to be inconsiderate. She was not to be impolite. And one of the curses of our society today is we have aggressive young women because their parents aren't teaching them. You know what? I grew up in a household where girls were not allowed to call boys. It just wasn't appropriate. And so many times the girls are doing the chasing. The girls are going after and hunting all these guys. And it's wrong. And parents, it's your responsibility, just like Naomi did and sat Ruth down and says, don't you do it. It's your responsibility to teach your children. Hey, you wait. You be polite. Boys need to be gentlemen. Boys need to show courtesy. Boys need to show respect. Girls need to be appropriate. They need to wait. They're not to be the aggressive ones. Remember Proverbs chapter 7? That woman, she is loud. She is stubborn. Her feet abide not in her house. Now let me explain verse 4. Look down at verse 4. And it shall be when he lieth down that thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie, and thou shalt go in and uncover his feet, and lay thee down, and he will tell thee all that thou shalt do. This was not forward whatsoever. It was the custom of their day. One commentator put it like this. A very prominent part of the marriage ceremony was for the bridegroom to throw his skirt of his robe over his bride. It would be kind of like the young girl wearing the class ring of her man. It would be kind of like the young girl wearing the jacket of the guy. The fact that Naomi gave the instructions to Ruth to go in and do this showed it was a common practice. There was nothing unethical, nothing immoral whatsoever. Secondly, Boaz praised Ruth when he saw that she was there lying at his feet. Look at verse 11. Chapter 3, verse 11. And now, my daughter, fear not. I will do to thee all that thou requirest. Now notice this. For all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. Boaz would have never said that if this had been an immoral solicitation. It is important, it is vitally important that we teach our young people they're to be moral. Listen. They're to be moral in their thoughts. And Dad, you have to teach it. Dad, you have to teach it by example. Young person, you are preparing yourself for your future mate, and the way you do that is guarding your thought life. We are to be moral in our words. We are not to talk about trash. We are not to talk about filth. We're not to text message filth. And parents, you have to teach your children that. You have to lay down the law and say, hey, we're going to be appropriate. We're going to be moral. We're to be moral in our actions. We need to teach our children morality in their thoughts, in their words, in their actions, in their suggestions. There was a need for conduct. Number 5, there was a need for comprehension. Look on in verse 4. Thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie. This word mark is translated mark 3 times in the Old Testament. Same Hebrew word is used and translated know 660 times. So what it's saying is, when Boaz goes and lies down, you're to notice, you're to know where he goes and lies down. Verse 7 tells us that he would sleep near the grain of corn to protect it from thieves. Ruth was not to make a visible mark where he was sleeping. She was just to observe him very carefully. Now here's the point. We are to give diligence to knowing our future mate. We are to get to know him. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7. Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge. As you're preparing for that future mate, and as God brings that person along, you are to take time and just get to know them. Number 6. There was a need for courage. Look on verse 4. Mark the place where he shall lie. Thou shalt go in and uncover his feet. Now Boaz, like all sleepers in this time period, had his cloak over top of him. So Ruth was to go down there. The man is laying out cold sleep. She was to uncover his feet and lay down. Now this custom was absolutely legitimate, but it took courage. Now listen, parents, you need to teach your children to be courageous. You need to teach your children to stand alone. You need to teach your children to say no, the way Esther did. If I perish, but I will not compromise. Number 7. There was a need for confidence. Look at verse 4 again. Thou shalt go in, uncover his feet, and lay thee down. Ruth had uncovered his feet. That took courage. But to lay there and wait took confidence and trust in Boaz that he would wake up and he would notice her. Laying down reflects genuine trust. Laying down expresses genuine confidence. Laying down expresses genuine faith. And you need to teach your children to have confidence in God. You need to teach your children as they have prepared themselves for their future mate. God may bring your mate right away. And it may take 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. You have confidence in God and just wait. In His perfect timing, He knows who you are, He knows where you are, and He will bring the perfect one into your life. My sister, homeschooled 12 years. Tracy and I had already married. Nolan was married. Seemed like, would God ever bring Scarlett someone? She had saved herself, never really even been out on a date. Guy Nolan and I went to college with here, brought his youth group through, going to Six Flags, stayed at the church, he and his wife, started talking to Scarlett. He says, hey, we got this incredible guy in our church. Love for him to meet you, come down here, meet your parents and all this stuff. Scarlett had struggled and struggled and struggled. Is there a guy out there for me that has saved himself? And the answer is yes. If you have confidence enough to wait. There was a need for confidence very quickly. There was a need for commitment. Look at verse 5. And she said unto her, all that thou sayest unto me, I will do. Ruth made a commitment to do it God's way. She made a commitment that she had been given godly advice and she was going to follow it. She had grew up in Moab. She said, wait a minute, this is not the way everybody else around the world is doing it. She made a commitment. Look at the verse one more time. And she said unto her, all that thou sayest unto me, I will do. All of it. I'm not going to pick and choose. I'm not going to say, okay, I'll do this, but I won't do this. I'll do this, but no, I'm not doing that. No. She said, I am completely surrendered. I'm going to do everything. Young people, you need to say that to your parents. Parents, you must give them proper instruction and preparation for marriage. Young people, the safest place to be in all the world is where Ruth is. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to submit. I'm going to do it. Look at verse 6. She went down into the floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law bade her. She kept her promise. She kept her commitment. Thursday night, Tracy and I received the phone call that one of our dear friends went home to be with the Lord. She was 94 years old. I used to drive this young couple to church 3 times a week. I was 15, 16. If there ever were 2 lovebirds, these 2 were lovebirds. He was in his 80s. She was in her 80s. I would go to pick them up for church, go knock on their door. They would come out. They would sit in the back seat. They would sit there and they would hold hands, and they didn't sit on opposite sides of the car. In their 80s, been married 60 years, they're sitting close together. You see them in church, sitting on the end of always sat on the same row, sitting on the end, sitting right together, always holding hands, always kind of like nibbling on each other's ear. I'm thinking, what's going on here? He went home to be with the Lord about 15 years ago. She was devastated. She was heartbroken. It took her a long time just to be able to deal with the grief. Got the phone call Thursday night that she went home to be with the Lord. My thought was, what a great reunion that must have been. True love. Listen, great marriages don't just happen. Great marriages are built. And great marriages are built early on. Parents, we have to do our part. Grandparents, we have to do our part. Young people, make a commitment that you're going to have a great marriage.